everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the And Also podcast. I am your host, Madison, and today we are going to be talking about grief yet again. Shocker. Here we are. Another week of grief. So today's guest is super special, and her name is Janice Kruger, and she is in the Volleyball Hall of Fame. She was one of the first female athletes in the United States to receive a scholarship to play volleyball in college, which is so amazing and inspiring for all of us girlies out there. And I'm just super excited to talk to her today. So she lost her father through her grief. It very much inspired all of the things that she's doing today to make a positive impact on the world. She's also a fellow podcaster, and her podcast is called Leave It Better. And you'll hear more about why it's called Leave It Better and her experience with what she's done with her grief to inspire her work. That's a little background on Janice, but I don't want to spoil too much. So before we get into our interview today, let's do our drink of the day. Okay, so I am very excited about this drink. It's really kind of embarrassing because I already drank one this morning, so I'm going to have a lot of caffeine in my body, but that's nothing new. I am a Chamberlain coffee fan. I think you guys know that by now. I'm literally obsessed with Emma Chamberlain and just Chamberlain coffee in general. And she came out with canned lattes. This is the mocha latte with oat milk, and this is the sweeter recipe. Let's give it a go, shall we? I don't know why I always struggle to open cans. This is the mocha flavor. It's my favorite. I also like the vanilla one. And I think there's also a salted caramel, which I don't think I've tried that one. Maybe next episode. They're vegan, which is great. Let's give it a try. So delectable. 10 out of 10. Literally, I'm going to chug this, and then by the end of this, I will be actually shaking and sweating. So that's great. Love it. Love Chamberlain Coffee. Shout out to Chamberlain Coffee, and you definitely need to try it. 10 out of 10. Sponsor me. Thank you. Next is our book of the week, and once again, it's been a minute since I've read this, but I can definitely recall how it impacted me because I genuinely love this book. This is called The Long Goodbye. It's a memoir by Meghan O'Rourke. I guess the opening line is, what does it mean to mourn today in a culture that has largely set aside rituals that acknowledge grief? So this book is about Meghan, and her mother died of cancer when she was 55. Meghan was not prepared, as most of us are not prepared for a grief like this. And I think because we're talking today about the grief and death of a parent, like this book was just so perfectly fitting. If you have dealt with the death of a parent and you want a memoir that you can relate to that talks about just the agony of grief, this is the one for you. It just is very raw and real. And I feel like a lot of times grief books can try to oversimplify it. They try to help cure the grief, and that's just not something that it works, at least not for me and for most of the people that I talk to. So actually diving into those feelings and the complexities of it and how grief brings out really every side of your emotional capability, that's really what this book kind of touches on in the journey of her mother becoming ill and then eventually losing her to cancer. That's the book. Read it. Let me know what you think, and let me know what you're currently reading. And with that, let's get into today's interview with Janice Kruger. I'm so excited for you guys to hear our conversation. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's get started. So today we have Janice Kruger, and I would love for you to introduce yourself and a little bit of your backstory and kind of why you're here today.
Well, I am Janice Kruger. I'm originally from the Midwest. I was a collegiate volleyball coach for 30 years and continue to be still a coach, probably pushing 55 at this point in time. My backstory related to our topic today is I lost my father when I was a junior in college, kind of unexpectedly from pancreatic cancer. And at that point in time, very, very fast moving disease progression, probably at a time when dads didn't go to the doctor because, they don't go to the doctor.
Yeah.
I was away in college. It was challenging being away. I come from a family of five, three brothers and one sister. The youngest of that group is 14 years older than I am. So I am absolutely a second family with the same mom and dad, but just showed up a lot later in the whole process. And so I lost my father when I was in college, and that was a challenging time to go through that. He did leave me with a lot, I should say, just of good things. Maybe didn't understand it all, honestly, because I was younger and wild and crazy, as they may say. You know, that's a little bit of my background with regards to a loss. There's been many others as well, but this one is the one.
Yeah, I feel like we're all going to face so many losses in our lives, but there's always that one that just completely changes. It's like that version of you is no longer here as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it just shifts your entire perception of what being alive means and what your life should look like now.
It felt a little unfair at the time that I would lose my father at that time. It seemed really early. My other brothers and sisters were much older, had kids of their own, kids my age, actually. So a very different experience for me and to them.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. And I haven't heard anybody share an experience like that before because they got so much more time with him and he got to see so much more of their lives. And then you're like, but I'm just in college. So that must have been just a very jarring experience. And it's hard too because you can't relate on the same way with how your siblings are dealing with it.
I was in athletics. I was a student athlete at the University of Nebraska, and I was on their volleyball team there. I had tremendous support, coaches, and even administrators at that point in time. So this is in the early 70s, actually. Ooh, that's a long time ago. I was away from home, kind of this new generation for my family, for my parents to really deal with. I was the first one to go to college. And it just struck me, and I don't remember now, like, the significance of the emotion of depression. I remember some parts. I was busy. I was in college. I had matches. I had school. And my mother was like, you just stay in school. You don't need to be here. You take care of what you need to take care of right now. And then we'll come back when you can, which then resulted, Madison, in a call to the athletic director, to my coach, you need to send Janice home. In some ways, I think I felt a little bit the timing of things and what I was in and what I was expected, and probably I didn't ask a lot of the right questions or was even able to say, really, I want to be there more. But being the obedient daughter that I was, I said, okay,
Right.
when you want me to come home, just let me know. And that resulted in a call to the administration at Nebraska, and they're like, Janice, it's time for you to go home. And there was a final conversation that each of my siblings had with my father, one-on-one in his hotel room, where he was still pretty good in terms of communication and saying things, but so small. He was like a 6-foot guy, 210 pounds. I mean, he was a big guy. And at that time, he was really small. And sitting there having this conversation with him as that young person, knowing not how to deal with that at all. I'm saying my final goodbyes, and he's imparting some wisdom to me, or he's just being himself. I can see the room. I can see the hallway. And walking out of there and just feeling so lost that this significant man in my life, that was going to be it for me. Everybody went through that process and had their own conversations. As I said, most of my family was older. They already had kids, and I was still trying to find myself, being in college, getting a degree, figuring out what I want to be when I grow up. And I remember those questions being asked quite often.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Oh yeah.
Um,
I'm 24 now. Just knowing where I'm at in my life and the grief that I've dealt with. I was 22 when I lost Regis. It's such a strange time because you're almost just coming to the realization of like, wow, I have this life and like I can do all these things. And you're almost just coming to life into like your conscious adult self. And then it's shaken up in a way that makes no sense. And it feels very unfair, especially at that age, because you're like, this isn't supposed to happen. I'm too young, or I'm in this point in my life where I'm not supposed to be feeling these feelings, and you don't even know how to begin to deal with them. And I do want to kind of circle back to that last conversation with your
Yeah.
dad. Before we get to that, you had mentioned your mom told you to stay in school and, keep doing all the things. Did you find that you had space to talk about what you were going through? And I know this was like, a different time. So, for me, there were a lot of outlets. There was a lot of spaces online, a lot of people, but then it must have been very, very different.
Very, very different. Yeah. Communication, I remember, was a letter from my mom that said, Dad's not been feeling so good. I'm really worried. It doesn't feel like it's a very good scenario situation. And so I got this message in a letter. Like, we wrote letters. I don't even know. We didn't really call a lot.
Right.
But within my family, which was away from home, and it's a very, blessed situation that you have as a college athlete. And I don't know if every college is like this, but I had support there in a program where there were women athletic directors and a female coach. So some part of understanding me and knowing how to communicate with me and be there, they were so kind. Probably some of it, Madison, I don't even know if I recognized that they were doing it. I just knew that it felt good. It felt like I could work through some of the process of going through a loss with them. Back then, if you didn't have that, I don't know what that would have been like, because of, again, my scenario with my family being older than me.
Right.
And I'm separate here. It's like an only child situation, scenario.
That's really amazing. It's reminding me so much. My mom lost her father when she was 15. And the first time she talked about it was probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago. She didn't have that space. And I find that a lot of people didn't have that space, it's just such a difficult thing to think about, because it really does take a full community to help you continue on through something like that.
Wow. Really challenging.
Yeah, it's
life-changing.
It's huge at that age, to have a complete life-altering situation and then to not be able to talk about it. So let's circle back to your conversation with your dad and really kind of how that led to the things you continued on to do in your life. So I would love for you to share what you're comfortable with about that conversation.
I was really, in his eyes, pretty young. He was so happy about the kinds of things that I had been doing. And one of the pieces that I remember so clearly is just like, I always just want you to make sure you're going out and making the world a better place. He probably did that in his life. He was well loved in our community. And I would say that it wasn't something that at that moment I heard for the first time. It was just sort of a part of growing up with him and my mother. Here's the funny part about that time I also remember is he couldn't really eat anymore, but he had Budweiser beer and tomato juice, which is still to this day one of my favorite drinks.
Like mixed together?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to try it sometime.
Oh, my goodness.
Called the red beer. He had a straw, and that's kind of how he was drinking it. And we're sitting there together, and I'm holding his hand, and he is just looking at me. I feel him and trying to take everything in. as much as I could, because I know that this is not going to be much longer in my life, in my world, in my physical being. He was just so wanted to hear from me that I would continue on. I would continue to do my best. I would continue to strive to be the best I could be. And I'm not sure I ever knew if he thought I had potential, but maybe he did. He was a farmer and then a retired little gravel truck driver. But it was important to him that I show up and continue on with becoming who I am. Really, I lead that into who I am today. But that conversation with him, and you don't get many times where you get to say goodbye. You know, if you have an accident and it's just gone, that's different. But I had preparation, and maybe in some part of all that, everybody around me had the same kind of lead-in to go through it. When I talk about family support from the athletic department, and I just want to say this, that my dad's funeral was the largest funeral in Randolph, Nebraska that there had ever been.
Wow.
There was people from all over, and they're small towns.
Right.
But he knew so many people. A contingency from the University of Nebraska athletic department, coaches, players, they all made the trip to
Wow.
Randolph, which is probably a 3-hour drive, to be there for me. That part, too, on top of my father's and my conversation, was so impactful.
That's amazing. That probably felt surreal in the moment. You know, you are dealing with this major thing, and then all of these people are just there.
They showed up.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Didn't expect it.
That's amazing. And I'm really curious, actually, what your relationship with him was like and what parts of it you still carry with you today.
Yeah, that's good. I was the son he wanted to have. We did a lot of things together. Like, I enjoyed being in his world, being with him, being a part of what his daily life was at that time, because he was, retired and driving this gravel truck. And so I would like to learn all these things that he's doing, and he would give me an opportunity to drive the truck. I thought that was like really cool. And I remember him saying, now don't back it up into this sand because we're going to get stuck. And guess what I did?
Like, I can already see where this is going.
I backed it up and he was like, oh, not mad at me, but like, okay, now we have to figure out what we're going to do. And I think some part of that relationship with him was just that, we go through life. We come across obstacles. We don't see them as like something bad. We see them as an opportunity for growth, to learn something, and a challenge to get out of. And probably that's another part of what I got from him growing up, was that type of education and love, really letting me be there with him. I'm thinking some dads might not have said, hey, that's okay. You just stay, do something else.
Right.
I got to go along.
That's such an amazing relationship, too. And it's great that there's been so much you've been able to take from it. So with the things that you have taken, leave it better is kind of the phrase. And I would love for you to talk about that specifically.
I'm the kind of person that really lives in the moment. When I would take time to possibly reflect, which probably wasn't enough time to reflect back on things, for sure I felt that presence or that spirit of who he was. It became something maybe just in growing up, honestly, that had always sort of been there. It just got really highlighted with his passing, and his passing so early in my life. And now I'm doing a podcast about Leave It Better. And a lot of things in my life have like come to fruition, connected in some way. This is probably one of those things as well. His general being was always so kind and helpful, and would do anything for anybody in our communities or in the surrounding communities. That he was a great example, that I always probably aspired to be like that. Not like I'm going to be like my dad. It was just in there. I loved and enjoyed our time.
I mean, just the things that I know about you, and I would love if you shared even more of your backstory of how you kind of lived to that statement. But you've done some incredible things in your life. To think that a lot of that was inspired by the person he taught you to be is that's just such a beautiful thing. And it's in a way just helps you to stay connected to him no matter
Hmm.
how long it's been since the last
Hmm.
time you saw him.
Hmm. Yeah.
And to carry that through and, now leave it better. Like I'm going to use that. So he's impacting me and he's impacting, other people who may never have gotten to meet him. So, I mean, I would love for you to share some ways
Yeah.
that you've really implemented that.
I think part of the leave it better piece and to, do good became kind of a lifestyle, really, especially because of the profession I chose to be in with athletic coaching and teaching too. It just put me in the right mindset, I think, for that to be something I lived in and
Right.
shared with other people. It is such a positive place from tragedy to conversation to this possibility to impact other people's lives. And so in coaching, a lot of times you have that opportunity to do that. I think what you give out, you get back most of the time. I guess I felt it in my entire career. I'd like to share, if I can, a scenario just recently that even brought some things to me full cycle with impact and the philosophy and the outlook on life that he had. I got a phone call and I was going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame for the Omaha University. I was so moved at the phone call, and he's trying to tell me, and like I'm crying. I'm just like crying. It's just a lot, and thank you. This is so amazing. During that time when I went home, the players that I had associated with me at that time and a very young age, so that wasn't long. I graduated from college and then I started coaching collegiately right away. And so these kids were probably in my second year of coaching. I was maybe 24. They showed up, they all showed up the night before the induction and brought their big bad selves there to talk and share things that they got from me. And I take that back because I think that is still connected back to my dad. And I literally was moved deeply for like 2 months. I would wake up in the morning, start my day, and I was in love overload. I just was like kind of beaming with pride and happiness and love from those kids. They're not kids anymore, some of them are 60 now. So, but they showed up and they didn't have to show up. I think what I put into them was also something that came back. It's like I said, going back to my dad, it was just his leadership and his will. You need to go out and you need to do good.
Yeah. And to know that you've continued to make that same impact, it's all the more reassuring that you've lived to the words that your dad told you that day. And just being able to like hear that, like what a feeling. That's incredible.
It really was and is. Grief is such an interesting thing, as you know.
Yeah.
It's like various levels and waves of when it hits you, when you feel it the most, when you can sort of make your way without it, but that it's always there. You don't ever really get over that sense of loss when you've had people in your life that have had so much impact. And so even today, that's something I think about, and I had to get better at learning how to deal with grief.
It can be agonizing. You could feel fine one day and then the next day you're like, oh, why am I trying? It's so unpredictable. You said it hits you at the most random times. Granted, I'm only about a year and a few months into my experience, but it tends to hit me at the best times, like the times when I'm supposed to be celebrating, the times I'm supposed to be, living in the moment and having a good time. Like when I graduated college, it was so hard for me because I'm like, how dare I be enjoying this? How dare I be celebrating when this person isn't here to do it? So I'm curious if there's a time where, I'm sure in the beginning it was much different, but even now, when does your grief tend to hit? Is it in those happier, higher moments? Is it when you're just not feeling your best, or is it kind of random?
I can't even tell you because I think it could be something I see. It could be something I hear. It could be a musical tune.
Yeah.
It could be a call from a friend or family member. It's like, hello.
Yeah. It's like, remember me? I'm still here.
Right. There are times when that was very dark, when it would just like really hit you hard. And I don't remember there being a real strong reason. It might be in losing someone else. It would also bring back those feelings and that sense of loss. But at the same time, the celebration, I would try to go to the celebration of what I did have, trying to guide it to the good stuff. But that's a practice, honestly. There were times when that was not a simple process.
Really anything to feel connected and closer to that person. It's been the most universal thing I found amongst a lot of grieving people. It's like, what can I do to keep this person here, even if they're not physically here? It's a rewarding thing. It can be hard at times. I guess another question I have directly related to grief is, since you were so young, you're at a very formative time of your life, what major things changed about you over the years of dealing with it, and how did you shift into like this new person, and what kind of things changed really?
Having that ripped out of your life, you do have to find replacements to some degree.
Yeah.
That can fill that space. For me, probably I had a lot of people that saw me during that time. And when you're in athletics, you're so close to each other. I don't know if this is the right spot for it, but one of the things that did happen, I didn't mention my mom a whole lot here. And not that she wasn't in my life, and not that she wasn't a very important part, but it was really more connected to my father. But in my senior year, my mother became the traveling mother with the University of Nebraska volleyball team wherever we went. I think it was twofold at that time for her and for me that helped healing during that next year because we had such an open space. I was thankful that my mom was in a place to do that for me, with me, and maybe for herself, which I totally appreciate that too.
Yeah.
That I was able to be there for her in that way, or that the team was able to be that way for her.
You kind of circle back to the sense of community that you had, and it's such a gift. That's what gets us through, because you really can't do it on your own. I hope at least that it's shifting more nowadays, but there was that mentality for so long of just like, pick yourself up and keep going, and it happened, and it is what it is. And that kind of brings me to our generational difference in how just mental health, like grief included, but also all the things, depression, anxiety, like all of the things that are very human. I've never really felt like I didn't have the space to share those things. And I know it's been so different for so many other generations, like even my parents, and so different. So I'm curious how that was for you, just generationally, your experience with that.
I have never been one to try to hold it back because I have shame, or somebody might look at me a certain way. I don't care. I'm telling you, I need help.
Yeah.
Or I could use a hug. I'm feeling these kinds of things. And I find when you are open and you tell people, or you ask them really to participate in whatever it is that you're going through, people are pretty good, especially those people around you that love you. And honestly, sometimes total strangers are even so kind. I've never been somebody, if I have a question, I'll ask the question. If I have a feeling, I'll tell you about it. I think makes the world better.
It leaves it better.
It makes it.
It really does.
I have a question for you, Madison, and I think, the generational part and, the difference between what I went through. We were both fairly young. I was very young But for you now, it's a tough thing. And in some ways, you knew there was struggle there, but it was probably a shocking. I don't know if it was really shocking, and that sometimes is really a challenge because it creates so many questions.
Yeah.
And that's one part. I didn't deal with that. I knew there was a disease. I knew the disease had progressed. I knew all those things. So in some ways, I can kind of think about it as in life and death. But for you, I feel for this space and this place and this time and all those things for you.
It's so interesting because he was mentally ill. As much as we know that that could end in a way that any other illness could end, you
Yeah.
don't want to go there. So I think there was always a part of me that knew it was a possibility. I knew that the level of schizophrenia he was dealing with, I mean, it's such a bizarre thing because you always think there's a solution. So when it happened, there was part of me that was like, I knew this was coming. Like, I'm fine. I can rationalize this. I knew that this was part of the illness. But then there was a bigger part of me that was like, what just happened? And what do I do with this? And why? And why couldn't I help? And why couldn't I stop it? So it was this very strange like dichotomy that in itself was a whole process of figuring out. But I think the biggest challenge of it was that at my age, nobody in my circle had gone through something like this. They may have lost a grandparent or like a pet. As much as those things are horrible and hard, it's different, especially the suicide of someone who was 24 at the time and who, you know, I was there for this whole battle of mental illness. The difficult piece of being so young was that as much as my friends wanted to support me and wanted to be there, they didn't understand on a experiential level what I was going through. And I had to learn to have grace for that and to be like, I can't expect them to know how I feel. And I don't want them to know how I feel. So that piece for me was really difficult. And that's kind of when I found myself gravitating to older people in my life, like my professors and like the adults that have been through that kind of stuff. It put me in this, like, I felt very separate from my friends. I felt very otherized, which was a very difficult thing.
You don't know what you don't know. And
Yeah.
as much as they have empathy for you and want to be there, it just isn't the same. It wasn't
Right.
what you needed, right? Experience in life is a great place to go. I've always been in love with the elderly.
Same.
My grandmother used to take care of folks that needed help and care. And that was another place probably that I learned a lot of things about being giving, and there's so much there. There is this other side of it, a little bit like my mom, where she's like, you don't need that. It's not really a problem. And that maybe that was a generation before. I'm not sure.
Right.
You know, I feel for you having had that experience, the love for you had for this guy. You know, mental health is, you don't see a Band-Aid, you don't see a cast, you don't see a boot on your foot or
Right.
crutches, but it's there, and their mind is somewhere, and maybe sometimes you can see it in their eyes or you can see it in their mannerisms, but even then, people don't recognize that very often.
For me, it's as much as, you know, there wasn't a direct relation for a lot of people. They were still trying. They were still supporting, whether it was like, oh, we're just going to get you out of the house. Like, we just need to
Yeah, right.
get you off the couch. Or, hey, let's brush your hair together. The little things. And that stuff was so meaningful because I didn't have it in me to do that. But the fact that the conversation was open was everything. And I'm curious too, you've probably faced losses since. I mean, how does that feel, having this major loss, this life-altering loss, and then the other losses? I mean, what is that like going forward?
You know, I don't think I deal well in grief.
Same.
I'm more aware and sort of feel like what the process is some, but yeah, I have. had a lot of grief and actually some suicides in my family. My mother passing, my grandmother passing, a lot of key important people in my life, having then been so far from my nieces and nephews are my age, and so we're like brothers and sisters are
Right.
connected. It's just and so I have great nieces and
Right.
nephews. That too is also a very different feeling.
Yeah.
But yeah, it takes me a while to process through things for sure. I get it goes pretty deep I feel the loss, and it takes me a while to get to the celebration. They're not suffering anymore or whatever, but we're now having to figure out how to live
Yeah.
without that presence in our life, even as I've gotten older. Probably it's happening more rapidly at my age now.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm not sure I'm prepared for all that. I know sometimes it's happening. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that's where,
Right.
this is the space I'm in.
I don't know. It's like this shadow that's just there, and you have to learn to walk with it.
I don't think as a society we have done all that well. I always felt families, if you had pets, you could learn about loss early. I just think there's so much that we don't. It's a fact.
Yeah,
There is
1,000,000%.
and there is death, and taxes too. That people
Yeah.
when you're younger, and maybe that's changed now. I honestly I don't know what it's like for kids now. If it's something that's discussed more.
We didn't talk about it until it happened. Like I knew, like, okay, people die. It happens. It's usually, I was always like, it's old people that die. It's going to be like my grandparents in 20 years. I never thought it would be people I graduated high school with. I never thought it would be people that I spent my youth with at this point. For me, it was like, I knew, but once it happened, then it was like, okay, now we need to step up and come together. I don't remember like talking about it actively until it was there. We do very much live in a culture that is like, keep moving, keep doing your thing when you're dealing with the worst thing you've ever dealt with. But I do hope that we're shifting. And I really do think that we are. I have to think that we are because we just need to. I would love for you to talk about your podcast and what you're doing with Leave It Better.
I'm doing the podcast for the Side Out Foundation, which is a foundation that is like 15, 16 years old already. Our emphasis is supporting and working in the metastatic breast cancer because we felt like there were a lot of folks and there wasn't a lot of money being spent in that area. And we have Dig Pink events that colleges, universities put on. And our podcast is an opportunity for them to hear conversations with well-respected coaches or athletes, individuals in the business of volleyball, sharing this knowledge and these people with our community in hopes that they will want to know more about the Side Out Foundation, what we do, and how they can help us to help people. Cancer is a very difficult disease. Metastatic, which is the end stage, there is no cure at this time, but we're hoping that along the way with the support we get, we're able to give people more time, more tomorrows. Maybe in their time of battling the disease, they will come up with a cure that saves their life. I think if you ask anybody when they're in that space and know they have a terminal disease, what they want most is time. That's what we're trying to do on the science side.
That's so wonderful. And I just love that it's all circles back to your dad. Like it makes my heart so happy. Anyone watching this, tune in. Because I think there's a lot of wisdom to be taken from that. I would love to know what generational wisdom you can share with the upcoming generations, because my viewers are mostly Gen Z and like kind of 25 and under. So I'm sure you have a ton, but maybe pick a few and the most important things you would like to share.
There's so much value and connectedness with the person, with people that is outside of your phone.
Yes.
Listen, I think it's a marvelous tool, but life is a bit of balance, and you have to stay somewhat in balance because the connections you make in life, person to person, not through a video or not through something. Please take advantage of those and go out and experience that and find ways that you can connect there, because I think you'll find it really rewarding and just really special. I think we were always meant to be touched, right? You you want to feel that togetherness, and life is a lot better when you're in a place that you have the true human connection, physical space with each other. That feels good. Make it happen for you.
I love that because I very much agree. It's hard living in a digital world as somebody who does love connection and conversation and just real life. And I think my generation spends so much time worrying about all the things we don't have, all the people we don't know, all the milestones we haven't met. It's hard to live in the now and just enjoy being alive and the opportunities that we're given. So I think that's something many people need to hear.
Being grateful is a really powerful space to be in. There are so many things when you sit down and you just for a second take it in and just feel that, and in some ways let people know how you feel. It just permeates more and more, and I think for our world right now, sometimes it does feel like we hear a lot of negative things, and that's always been the case.
Right.
It's easier to report on that than it is the real fun stuff. I'm grateful to have met you today.
Me too.
And I think that when you get an opportunity to have conversations with people, you learn a lot.
Yeah.
And I love learning and look up and look into the skies, see what's around you. And that will help you even be more grateful for the world that we do live in, the space that we're in.
And I'm really happy you said that because it's very important. But I want to thank you so much for coming on today. This was such a wonderful experience. I am so happy that we got to do this, and I feel like I learned a ton from you. I tend to live in a more negative space in general, a little existential, a little bit negative. So this just felt like the positivity that I feel like I've been looking for the last year and a half. It means a lot.
You call me anytime you want to have a conversation.
I will.
You're doing really some good work, Madison, and it's fun. And hopefully it's also healing for you too. When you got passion about something, you got to go with it. You got to find where it can impact and really make a difference. It was a pleasure to meet you today and to be on to be interviewed here.
Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thank you guys so much for listening to and or watching this episode of the And Also podcast. I, of course, always appreciate you taking the time to listen to these conversations, as they are super, super important in regards to talking about mental health. And if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and leave a comment below. And if you are listening on any streaming platform, be sure to give the show a 5-star rating. It very much helps us out. It helps us to reach more people who need to hear conversations like this, and send it to a friend who would enjoy this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next week with another episode. Bye, guys.